Hello and welcome to Dartside Scenics. In this video I'll be creating a railway model using a floating shelf from Ikea. It's often difficult to know where to display the finished dioramas, but this is the perfect solution. I start by masking off the edges so I have a nice clean finish at the end. As with previous dioramas, I'll be using Celotex to build up the land. First of all, I'll be cutting out an embankment. This jigsaw can be set at an angle, so it makes it nice and easy to cut. And another thin layer is cut using a bread knife. To help the Celotex stick to the shelf, I'm using a Stanley knife to scratch the surface. This is Gorilla wood glue. I almost ran out, so I'm scraping every last drop from the bottle. When the pieces are in place, I put some weights on the top and leave it overnight to dry. I'll be using two bridges on this model, so I'm just cutting a space at either end. Sculptamold will be used all over, so I pop some in a jug, add some water and mix. As it's quite a large area, I'm doing it in small batches. While that's drying, I turn my attention to the first bridge. When all the pieces have been cut out, you can use a small file or sandpaper to remove any rough edges. This is extra thin cement from MIG. When all the pieces are glued together, I give them a quick spray with a light grey primer. To enhance the stone wall sheets in the kit, I'll be using some Das clay for pointing. When gluing the walls into place, I'm using the rest of the kit just to make sure the distance is still correct. And then the final section can be covered with the Sculptamold. I'm just adding a small amount of clay where the walls meet to fill the gap. The base colour for this model will be burnt umber acrylic from Vallejo. This is watered down before brushing on. I'll be using earth texture on most of the model, so first of all I'm brushing on some matte Mod Podge. This earth scatter is a mixture of Woodland Scenics fine turf, brown tile grout and also some fine sand. I did also add some small stones to the mix for some variety. To make sure everything sticks, it's given a quick spray of watered down washing up liquid. This is followed with a spray of scenic cement. I clearly failed to clean the spray head correctly last time as it was sticking constantly. Onto the second bridge, I'll be scratch building this from 1.5mm card. These pieces will be glued to each side before testing the top piece. The same card is used to cut the arches. Initially I only used a small amount of glue, but when I was happy with the position I added some more. I double check the fit and then I'll be adding some stones later. Back to the first bridge, I'm just gluing the sides onto a piece of packaging which I sprayed with grey primer. I'm not fixing it to the model quite yet as I need to paint the walls underneath. These are both brown grey acrylic washes. And back again to the second bridge, I'm giving it a spray of the grey primer. For the arches I picked up these brick sheets from Wills. These are very easy to cut and also flexible. To aid the gluing process, it does help to bend them to shape. I need a quick hold, so superglue is the obvious choice. As with the other stone walls, I'll be using dashed clay again for the pointing on the bricks. The large arch stones will be added individually, and for that I'll be using balsa wood. After measuring, these are cut out with a scalpel. Scenic glue is brushed onto the bridge and then the stones are added with tweezers. I've used these stones on other dioramas and they'll be perfect for this bridge. More balsa wood is cut to create the capping stones. The top of the stones will be slightly curved, so I'm using a knife to create the shape. And finally a quick sanding before they're measured for cutting. And a generous bead of scenic glue is used to attach them. For the pointing on this bridge, I'm brushing in some dry plaster of Paris. To fix the powder, it's sprayed with watered down washing up liquid. To create the stone effect on the balsa wood, I need to water down some filler. It's stippled on with one brush, and then using a clean brush I run over it again until it looks like stone. The same is done for the arch stones. To create the weathered stone look, I'm using 3 different washes. And then it's ready to glue into place using scenic glue. The edges are blended in using more of the earth texture. With a small piece of sponge I start the weathering on bridge 1. This burnt umber acrylic is the first layer of a rust effect. The next layer is a sandal brown acrylic from Vallejo. This is applied with a brush. It's finished off with a black weathering powder. And then it's time to fix it in place permanently. I just need to make sure the track lines up properly and then remove the fish plates from either end. The track is given a quick spray of light grey primer, followed by olive drab and then some light brown spray. To stick the track in place, I'm using Scenic glue. This is weighted down and then left overnight to dry. This is a Gaugemaster granite ballast which is simply sprinkled over the track. When both sides are done, I use a tapping technique which I picked up from Debbie McMillan's channel. Now the ballast is settled, I use Woodland Scenics scenic cement over the entire track. The centre of the model will have a dry stone wall, so I'm breaking out the WWS stones again. I go into more detail on one of my other videos, but it's basically scenic glue and then place the stones and build them up in layers. I usually find that once I've finished one layer, I can go back to a start and the glue is dry enough to start another one. It's always nice to have part of the wall falling down, so I'm leaving a gap in the centre. I picked up this platelayers hut from Expressway Models in Buckfastleigh and thought it would make a nice addition. When all the pieces are cut out, it's simply a case of using the extra thin cement to fix it together. A quick spray of light grey primer is used, followed by a Humbrol brown acrylic. Instead of dashed clay, I'm using a quick drying filler for the brick pointing. Burnt umber acrylic is brushed onto the wood panelling. The door is painted in green and I just pick out the hinges in brown. With the sponge I'm dabbing on some burnt umber and some saddle brown for the rust effect. This is a rust weathering powder from Revel, which really helps to blend the colours. And then the black weathering powder is used around the chimney pot. This army green weathering powder is used around the base of the hut. The base template of the hut is made using 1.5mm card, and I'll glue this into the model so there's something to glue the hut to later. I'll be using 2 of the gates from this pack, so I'm just cutting out the templates ready for gluing. This is Rocket's card glue, which is recommended in the instructions, but you can also use PVA. This kit also includes the posts, which is just 3 pieces to glue together. I had a fence post and wire kit left over from a previous project, so I'll be using that either side of the gate posts. These posts have a depth marker on them, so you just add a small amount of scenic glue and add them into the model. At this stage, I often use a small amount of weathering powder to mark out the tracks. This helps me to remember not to add static grass to those areas. To glue the static grass, I'll be brushing on some matte Mod Podge. Some gaps are left intentionally so you can see some of the earth texture through the grass. This static grass is 2mm WWS North European. When it's had some time to dry, I just hoover up the excess. To weather the dry stone walls, I'm using a grey-brown acrylic wash. This is a raw umber acrylic and I'm dry brushing it onto the gates. Before gluing the gates in place, I need to feed the wire through the fence posts. To glue the wire to the fence post, you need a very small amount of superglue. I'm using a thin wire to apply it. Now the wire is in place, I can glue the gates. This footpath sign was also left over from another project, so I thought that would make a nice feature. Now to add some variety to the grass, I'm carefully adding some layering spray on the bank. This is 4mm WWS Patchy. And yet another leftover accessory, this roller was glued to the corner of the field. More of the 4mm grass was used to give the effect that it had been there for a long time. And now it's time to glue the plate layers hut into place. Some earth texture will be sprinkled around the base later to blend it in. Some fine leaf foliage is glued into random areas with scenic glue. To start the riverbed, I'm going to individually glue some large stones. This is followed by some twigs and branches which you can either buy or pick up from your garden. And then I sprinkle on some smaller stones and different types of ballast. I also added a small twig and leaf mix before spraying it with watered down washing up liquid. While it's wet, I sprinkled on some Woodland Scenics coarse turf. And then I add some scenic cement using a pipette, and this is left overnight to dry. To To prepare for the resin pour, I add a generous bead of scenic glue and then a plastic sheet to create a dam. When both ends are done, I leave it at least 24 hours to dry. This was the first time I'd used this Ammo Rust Tracks acrylic and I was really pleased with the results. The ballast was looking too clean, so I added a dark grey wash over the entire track. For the moss effect on the bridge, I brushed on some scenic glue and then sprinkled over some Woodland Scenics burnt grass fine turf. The grass needed some more variety, so I used a number of fine scatters to achieve this. And then scenic glue was sprayed over the entire model. With the riverbed and the dam completely dry, it's time to pour the resin. This is 2 parts water to 1 part hardener. The kitchen scales make sure you're completely accurate. You can use an acrylic paint of your choice. I'm using burnt umber. I was a bit careless with the amount of paint and wouldn't use this much next time, but the end result was fine. Providing you're on a completely flat surface, the resin will self-level. If any bubbles fail to disappear, you can use a blowtorch to remove them. 24 hours later, when the resin is cured, you can remove the dam and then using a sharp knife remove any excess. The water ripples are created using gloss Mod Podge. After brushing it on in small sections, you can use a straw to blow through or an airbrush to create the ripples. This tractor model is from Oxford Diecast and I've just weathered it to fit the scene. These sheep are from PECO scene. I gave these a very light spray from a distance with a Humbrol light brown paint. A couple of oil drums were sprayed and then given a rust effect before gluing into place. And then 2 tyres were leant up against the side of the hut. And an old wooden wheel to lean against the wall. I plan to have a tree at one end of the model, so this is a twig from the garden. Some pieces of seafoam are added using superglue. To speed up the process, I'm using superglue activator. When I was happy with the shape, I gave it a spray with grey, brown and green paint. Trying to avoid the trunk and the main branches, I used some WWS layering spray as the adhesive. And then I can sprinkle on some olive green foliage. When the hole is created, I just add a small drop of scenic glue and then put the tree in place. To cover any gaps, I'm using earth texture around the base of the tree. A spray of watered down washing up liquid is followed by scenic cement. I'll be adding some daffodils at one end of the model. This is just some long grass glued together and then dipped into a yellow hue. I create them slightly too long to make them easier to handle, but then I bury them in the ground to make them the right scale. And some green scatter is added to ensure any holes are covered. To make sure they hold, I'm using some more watered down washing up liquid and then some scenic cement. As the entire track was covered in paint, I'm now using a PECO track rubber to clean the top. And after hoovering, I use some track magic to ensure all the dirt and grime is gone. Where moss was added on the bridge, I'm using some army green weathering powder to create streaks. Light earth weathering powder is brushed onto the tracks. And I did some extra weathering to the railway track but forgot to film it. And then I could peel off the masking tape and obviously scrape off any excess. And there we are, a nice little feature on the wall. To get some nice close-up photos, I took it to a field just outside Totnes.